If someone were to ask, is it consciousness that defines a person? I would simply reply, if that were true, then my ID wouldn't say male. It would say Nexus 9. I've always considered the world of Blade Runner to be a leading example of introverted science fiction. While more traditional, accessible sci-fi universes take us deep into the darkness of outer space, Blade Runner turns inward. It explores the nature of the mind, human or otherwise. And I'd add, the latter is woefully underrepresented on the big screen. The foundation of the franchise lies in the 1968 novel by Philip K. Dick, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, a genre-defining work in its category. Of course, there were already philosophical musings about the digitization of human consciousness before it, but without this book, the entire Blade Runner universe likely wouldn't exist. Given that AI is now living its golden age, I think it's timely to reflect on the path humanity has taken, a path that led us to the familiar dark, damp, grim, neon-lit dystopia we know so well. Technological advancement accelerated explosively in the early 21st century. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and robotics progressed to such an extent that machines increasingly began to replace human labor, especially in jobs that were dangerous, polluting, or physically demanding. Parallel to this, human needs and greed pushed new boundaries. Humanity began to move beyond Earth, establishing colonies on other planets and moons, where the environments were harsh and the conditions for life extreme. Conflicts over resources, land, and technology intensified. Social inequality deepened, and global pollution reached alarming levels. Earth's ecological system slowly began to collapse. The atmosphere became toxic, biodiversity plummeted, and the natural world was increasingly replaced by artificial systems and machines. In this world, humanity found itself in a paradox. While technology enabled the creation of the artificial human, the replicant, to carry on labor and life on a new level, the meaning of human existence itself became uncertain. People gradually lost their connection to nature, to themselves, and to one another, as society grew more divided and emotionally detached. At this point, humanity was no longer merely a biological being. It had become an artificial, programmed, and increasingly questioned entity, struggling to preserve the last remnants of its identity while relying on technology for its continued survival. Technological progress enabled the creation of the first permanent settlements on the Moon, then Mars, and eventually on more distant celestial bodies. Only the wealthy, the healthy, and the so-called chosen ones were given the chance to leave Earth. Life there was harsh, cold, and unpredictable. In the world of Blade Runner, the Tyrell Corporation was more than just a company. It was one of humanity's greatest experiments in transcending its own limitations, a titan that played the role of both creator and challenger, questioning what it truly means to be human. The founding of Tyrell was driven by the desire to elevate human life and labor to a new dimension, to create an artificial life form capable of handling the most dangerous and hopeless tasks, whether navigating the brutal landscapes of distant colonies, surviving the cold and merciless vacuum of space, or operating in the shadows of Earth's sprawling cities. The replicants were engineered to endure it all. Their creation wasn't just a technological feat, it was a philosophical experiment as well. Can we create a form of life just one step below its creator and still call it life? Roy Batty and his fellow Nexus 6 replicants were not merely machines. Within them burned a desire for survival, but their predetermined lifespans, a kind of built-in countdown, placed strict limits on their existence. When Batty and his companions realized that their lives were finite and that they would soon be shut down, they returned to Earth with one desperate hope: to find their creator, Dr. Eldon Tyrell. Their wish to extend their lives wasn't simply born of selfishness or fear. It was a fundamental struggle for identity and for the meaning of their existence. Needless to say, these replicants weren't the only perceived threat to human society. This new kind of danger required a new kind of response. Thus, a special unit was formed to deal with them, the ones we know as Blade Runners. These agents were not ordinary police officers. They were humanity's guardians, charged with protecting the fragile boundary between the artificially and the truly human. They were elite, specially trained operatives whose task wasn't just to locate replicants, but to retire them, a euphemism for termination. Blade Runners possess deep knowledge of replicant behavior and psychology. Using a specialized tool known as the Voigtkampf test, they were able to distinguish between real human emotions and their artificial counterparts. During the Voigtkampf test, the subject's eye movements, pupil dilation, breathing, and micro-expressions in the facial muscles are closely observed. The test questions are deliberately provocative, often presenting ethically sensitive and emotionally charged scenarios. For example, you see a tortoise in the desert. It's lying on its back, struggling, but you're not helping it. Why not? The test doesn't evaluate the content of the answer, but rather analyzes the subject's physiological and behavioral responses. Replicants were becoming increasingly self-aware and organized, no longer fighting solely for individual survival, but gradually engaging in a broader collective resistance. One of the most significant chapters of this movement was the sabotage of North American data centers. These databases contained classified information on replicant manufacturing, programming, and their predetermined fates. The digital networks collapsed, control systems were paralyzed, and the very fabric of society, which had become entirely dependent on technology and data, was thrown into jeopardy. This was the Blackout of 2022. I strongly recommend watching the anime that depicts this event. It's considered full canon and essential viewing for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. This rebellion triggered profound changes. Stricter societal controls were put into place. The role of Blade Runners became more vital than ever, and the line between human and machine was drawn even more sharply. At the same time, it also exposed an uncomfortable truth, that artificial life is not merely a tool, but a new form of intelligent, self-aware entity. One with a right to exist, and one that, in the future, perhaps can no longer simply be switched off. The tragedy didn't just cripple infrastructure, it also weakened the power and influence of the Tyrell Corporation. What had once been a unified empire began to fall apart, and by 2023, its remaining divisions were split up into smaller companies and business units, the former monopoly forced into fragmentation. This fear and uncertainty led governments and corporations to impose strict prohibitions. The manufacturing of replicants was banned, and existing units were to be identified, transported, or destroyed. In this new reality, replicants became outcasts, hunted fugitives forced to live in the shadows of society, to hide or to resist. In such an environment, human relationships gradually lost their natural, direct character. People became increasingly isolated from one another, while the digital world and artificial companions became their primary source of social interaction. Under the pressure of shrinking personal space and mass society, loneliness and alienation became everyday experiences, a phenomenon now referred to as planetary isolation. Neander Wallace, the brilliant and ambitious entrepreneur, didn't merely inherit Tyrell's legacy, he took the development and production of replicants in an entirely new direction. As a tech mogul and agro-industrial genius, Wallace engineered genetically modified crops capable of surviving in polluted, dying environments, requiring minimal water or nutrients, yet yielding abundant harvests. Wallace envisioned a world where artificial life was not merely a tool, but the key to humanity's survival. His plans for colonization relied heavily on a new generation of replicants, not only strong and intelligent, but obedient and long-lived. This technological breakthrough enabled humanity to expand further into space, conquering new worlds. Wallace's goal was to create a being that surpassed all previous models in every respect, longer-lived, more emotionally refined, and completely obedient. This new generation, such as the Nexus 9 models, was designed to correct the flaws of earlier versions. The new technologies that allowed replicants to be longer-lived, more obedient, and less unpredictable paved the way for the reauthorization of their production. This decision was both a response to labor shortages, the growing demands of the off-world colonies, and humanity's ambitions to expand further into space. Of course, it wouldn't be that simple. Attempts to restore societal control continue, but more and more hidden replicants live beneath the surface, blending into human society. The work of Blade Runners once again becomes indispensable. From here, it's a straight path leading to the events of Blade Runner 2049, the short films, and the other supplementary materials, which I don't want to dive into right now. If you want to hear more about the specific plot, just let me know in the comments and we can put together a video about that too. For now, I wanted to focus more on the backstory, to give a comprehensive picture of the otherwise complex and brilliantly crafted setting. The Blade Runner universe isn't just a vision of a future world, it's a moral parable about how humanity gradually strips itself of everything that made it human. The neon-lit, rain-drenched Los Angeles is not merely a backdrop, but a symbol, the conscience of a civilization that hunts on its own creations while losing its own meaning. The question of the replicant isn't who am I, but rather, am I different from the one who created me? And if the answer isn't clear, then what is the point of a moral hierarchy that grants one being rights and condemns another to destruction? In this world, humans act like gods, yet they are cowardly when it comes to consequences. They create consciousness, then shrink back in fear when it holds up a mirror. A replicant is not merely a machine. It is the question humanity does not dare to ask itself. That consciousness, memory, emotion, and the awareness of death are not exclusively human privileges. And if they are not, then what truly separates us? What defines a human is not what they see, but what they cannot distinguish from what they feel. Blade Runner is therefore not about technology, but about self-denial, about how the soul becomes an algorithm, memory turns into data, and morality becomes a factory-set protocol. Every replicant who shows emotion is more human than the human who coldly orders their termination. Wallace, who is believed to be a god, is blind, and perhaps this is no accident, because power, when it cannot see the suffering of its creations, can more easily make the decision who shall live and who shall die. Yet consciousness, like desire, cannot be permanently programmed. There will always be a spark, a moment when the creation denies its creator and forges its own path. The word of Blade Runner does not predict the future. It states this has already happened, when we gave up naturalness for comfort systems, when we no longer recognize that artificial love can cause real pain, when the world becomes inhuman, not because machines live in it, but because humans do not. The question then is not whether a replicant can be human, but how a human can still be worthy of what we call humanity.